So I'm Kaitlyn. I am here to talk about building beautiful Android animations with MotionLayout. And just to give a little bit more, that was an excellent introduction. Like was mentioned, I am a dog lover. I have a dog there pictured in the bottom left, dog mom. I play Ultimate. I'm an aunt. I write code. And like a lot of y'all, I am figuring out how to navigate this new normal. But yeah, mentioned before, but I would love to hear where everyone else is visiting or calling in from. So if you are in the chat, go ahead and post where you're from. That'd be really cool. And here's my handle, just in case anybody wanted it. It's for Twitter and Instagram. So yeah. My journey through becoming an Android developer was a pretty normal trajectory, or maybe not normal, but pretty straight trajectory. I got a 4-year degree from Harvey Mudd and went on to start work as an intern at Uncork Studios and got hired full-time. That's an agency in Portland. I had a brief stint at eBay on the selling team, and then now I am at Stream, which I would love to talk about if there are any questions about that later on. I know I've got a couple streamers in the audience, which is great. Thank you so much for y'all's support. I would also like to mention that this is only my second conference talk. So, you know, where I'm learning as we go here. 3 years ago, gave a talk at Android Developers Conference called Layout Lessons, which was about ConstraintLayout v1.0. So I've kind of always been into this sort of Android layout world and staying up on the latest stuff. I think ConstraintLayout is incredibly powerful. And now MotionLayout, brought to you by ConstraintLayout, is a very powerful way to build animations. So let's take a look at what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about motion scenes, and in particular transitions within those scenes and constraint sets and what those are and how to build them. We're also going to talk about the stagger functionality, which is a little bit of a complicated math problem to solve animations starting at different times. And we're going to talk about custom attributes, different custom attributes that you can set in your motion layout to make smooth transitions in all kinds of ways. And we will look at the basics of the Android Studio motion editor. What we won't cover is keyframes. There is a notion of this thing called keyframes where you can sort of create interim areas in your animation to make things come in a cool way and different angles and stuff. I actually haven't ever found the need to use this yet, so I don't have a lot of knowledge on it, but there are a lot of great resources out there for keyframes. I have managed to get everything that I need out of the stagger functionality, but again, there's a lot of good resources out there. So as with anything, there's lots of places to continue to learn about this. Also, I won't go super in depth on the Android Studio motion editor. I haven't used it very much because it's relatively new. Most of the building of motion layouts that I've done is like purely XML. So I have a lot of experience in that area and not so much in motion editor. Let's talk about motion layout and what is it good for? What is it good at? Obviously, it's good at transitions, really good at transitioning between like one scene and another scene, especially if there are shared views within those scenes. It's also really good at like sweeping animations of multiple views. It creates a really smooth transition with all of the views simultaneously. And it's really good at stateful animations. So my friends at Stream will know what I'm talking about with this, but it's really good at, you can mark the transitions programmatically for different things that are happening. For example, we used it with orientation changes to update the views accordingly. Things that it's not so great for, repeated animations, so looping animations, it's not super good at. It's mostly for transitioning from one thing to the next with a designated start and end. It's also not like super useful for single view animations. You can definitely use it, but it's a lot of building up of multiple files just for a single view to animate. So I might not recommend it in that case. So let's take a look at a constraint layout or what constraint layout normally looks like. So This will hopefully look familiar to a lot of you, but if not, let's talk about it. Here we've got the constraint layout, which is the basic container. And then we also have, you can see like a constraint top, a constraint start, and a constraint end to end of parent. And constraint layout, what's important to note about it is it will actually not allow you to not constrain your items. It looks like a pretty hefty error. It will actually compile and just throw all of your views in the 0, 0 position at the top left of the screen. But it really wants you to constrain those views. And then with motion layout, it's a little bit different. You're able to put all of your views with their IDs in the motion layout container without constraints, which is a little bit wild, but we'll talk about it. So a motion layout lives in your layout file as a container, just like a constraint layout would. And it actually is an extension of a constraint layout in a lot of ways. It also declares all the views in the motion layout with IDs, just like a normal constraint layout would. However, this is the weird part, it doesn't have any constraints for views that are going to animate. And it connects to a motion scene via a layout description. So what the heck is a motion scene? A motion scene is what sort of defines the transition and the different parts between which it will transition. So a transition contains the duration and the interpolation and the start and end states. It can also include the stagger information and like an on-click or an on-swipe listener. And then the motion scene also contains the constraints for all of the animated views declared in the scene within the given constraint set. So let's look at a pretty basic example. Let's say we have this view here, the constraint set start. We've got our text view and our little image in the middle, and they're maybe constrained to each other and constrained to the parent on top and bottom. And then if we have our constraint set end here, where like maybe you tapped on the text view and it sent us to the constraint set end. And in that case, you can see the image is much bigger and the text view gets pushed to the bottom. What's really cool about this is if you put this constraint set start in and the constraint set end in, and then set the transition between them, motion layout will handle all of the interpolation for you. So you don't have to write any animation code for the image to expand, the text view to push down to the bottom, and it's going to look really seamless and beautiful. So let's look at an example. This is the example that we're working towards with all of the code that I'm about to show you, and we'll actually dig into the code a little bit in a moment. But it's a little bit fast in the video, so I might play it a couple of times. But we have a nice scene, and then we've got a little button in the top, and it expands out and has a couple of different text views that come down. So let's look at that one more time, just to get an idea of what we're working towards. And I threw the Women Who Code mission and vision in there just as sort of a nice call out there. But let's take a look at what it takes to build that sort of motion layout. Here you'll see this motion layout actually lives within the main activity layout class, and it is the main container. There is no other views inside or outside of this container. It's got a couple of things in it, like the width and height, the alignment, but really what's important to look at here is the layout description. So this one line here is what ties the motion layout to all of the animation code that we put in the scene. It's really cool. I don't know, it's kind of magic. You just put this line in there and then all the time it just like knows what's going on because it looks to the motion scene. And the motion scene is where a lot of the really cool stuff happens. So this is one of the elements within the motion scene, usually at the top. And it is a transition element. So here is where you designate what you want your start constraint set to be, what you want your end constraint set to be, and we'll look at the constraint sets in a moment. You can set the duration here. So here I've got the duration of my animation to be 600 milliseconds. You can set the motion interpolator. I've chosen ease in out, which is a pretty common one, but there are a lot of different kinds. And then you can set the staggered value. We'll talk a little bit about staggered in a moment, but that's something to note. And then finally, this is the onClick, which is super cool because the click action here is toggle, which means going back and forth between the start and the end state, depending on what the current state is. And you can just set a target ID here, so one of the views within your motion layout. And then every time you tap on it, it does a transition for you. So really minimizes the code that you need to write to get the animation running. So this is what one of the constraint sets might look like. Here's the start. I collapsed all of the constraints. We'll take a look at them in the code later. But what's really important to note is just that we have our ID here for the start, and that is what we use in the transition to tie things together. And the end looks almost identical. Another thing that's important to note is that there are a bunch of custom attributes that we can animate along with just the constraints of different views. So we could animate that text in the example before to move over and down with the constraints that we give it, but we could also change the text color, we could change the text size, we could change the color filter. Depending on what type of view it is, there's a lot of different things that you can do with it, and all in the motion scene. So we'll take a look at a lot of different custom attributes that I ended up using in that example. But what's kind of interesting about custom attributes is that they're a little bit hard to find the list of them. I actually found a way in the motion editor to find a pretty substantial list, but it's sort of a trial and error on trying to find the right custom attribute for what you're looking to do. But there are a lot of good resources out there. I found a lot of the custom attributes that I needed for the work that I've done in motion layout from, of course, our best friend Stack Overflow. So lots of people out there using motion layout and giving good advice on how to do so. Let's talk about stagger. I know that this slide has a lot of text and it's kind of small, and the point of it is not to read all this text, so you can just ignore most of it. The point of it here is that this is the docs for motion layout on one of their releases, and they created this enhanced staggered API that has kind of wild math that goes into how you define your stagger functionality. So I actually spent a fair bit of time working through the stagger math and learned a couple of key takeaways. So one of the most important what's the word? Equations that they give us there. Equation may not be the right word, but is this one that is view duration is equal to the total duration times 1 minus the stagger value. If you work this out to be a little bit easier, it means that you need your stagger value to be 1 minus the view duration over the total duration. I don't know why they made it so complicated, but the math that I did was I need 3 different views to animate in different times. So I want it to be about 1/3. The view duration over the total duration, I need to be about 1/3. So to simplify the math, I chose my stagger value as 0.6. So each of my views duration is 400. And 0.6 is what I've used for all of my staggered motion layouts since then. So it's worked pretty well for me. There's definitely a lot of playing around with it you can do. I'll kind of talk a little bit more about what the staggered looks like, but you might have noticed in that animation that first the circle came out and then the name came down and then the description came down. So basically it's just staggering the timing of the view animations. A little bit also unintuitive is that you have to set the motion stagger on each of the views to decide which ones come first or last. And unintuitively, the one with the highest number is the one that goes first, and the one with the lowest number is the one that goes last. So that's just sort of a brief overview of what you can do with staggered. There's a really, I wrote a Stack Overflow answer that sort of gives a better perspective on this, but there's answers out there. It is a unnecessarily complicated mechanism to get your animations to stagger properly, but I think it's worth it for the payout that you get. So I'm sure you all are wondering, you're like, wow, we've written all of this animation code in the motion scene and in the motion layout, but what about the activity? What do we have to do in the activity? And the entire animation in the activity looks like this. All we have to do is set the content view to be the activity main, and Android motion layout does everything else for you. So it's really amazing. All of that animation code that we saw in the previous example has no actual physical code in the activity class. I will break for gasps. I know I can't hear them, but I'm imagining you all gasping. It's pretty neat. Thank you, Stephen. So let's take a look at this one more time, and then we'll hop into the code for it. It's a pretty cool looking animation in my opinion, and it was relatively easy with the motion layout code that we have created. So let's see. Let's see if I can figure out how to share the right window. Give me one moment. Oh, goodness. Okay. Here we go. Share again. We'll share this screen. All right. So I know this may be a little bit small if you aren't on a large monitor, so I've got the ability to sort of zoom things in here. Let's first look at the code view of the activity class. So this, again, is the same animation that we were working on before. And here is our motion layout, which is the main container, as I was talking about. There's a couple things going on here. We've got the beautiful background of Multnomah Falls in there. And the big important thing here is the layout description. So again, this points us directly to the scene that's going to define all of those animations. The image filter view is a super cool thing that was released with motion layout. It's something that you can designate a source, like one drawable, one image, whatever it may be, and you can designate an alternate source, and then you can crossfade between the two as part of your animation, which is really, really cool. So here we've got our source for the circle behind the image to be a dark pink or magenta perhaps. And then we've got our nice bright blue end value. And if you look closely, I've slowed down the animation here a fair bit. It will animate smoothly between the pink and the blue, which is pretty fun. And there's a lot of really cool, weird things you can do with that. I'm not certain. Yeah, I think you will see my screen if I do this. This was a funny one that I thought was really interesting. This person decided to animate between two different faces, which was a little bit, I don't know, cool, creepy, you decide. But there are a lot of cool things that you can do with it. So we'll go back over here. What else is cool in here? Oh, you'll notice that none of these views have any constraints, which is wild because they are actually all part of a constraint layout in a way, but the motion layout removes the necessity of constraints because we set them later. I think that is all of the important stuff in this file. So let's take a look at the motion scene. Here we have our motion scene. It's connected to the activity again through the layout description, just the name of the file. And we can kind of see we've got our constraints at end and start defined, and I increased the duration to 3 seconds so that we can really see how things are breaking down. I also, I guess, changed the motion interpolation here to be linear. I guess maybe to just sort of show the different interpolation styles. So that is linear, which is, you know, nice enough, but let's see what ease in out looks like. Nice thing is that's the only thing you have to change to get a completely different feel for your animation. Now we get sort of a nice sweeping motion into our new view, which is really cool. And here's our staggered value again that I was sort of trying to break down before. Like I said, 0.6 is the sweet spot for me. I'm not sure. I think if you had more views to animate than 3 different types, then it might be different. But here you'll notice you can see the stagger a little better when we are going this slowly. And we can take a look at how that works. So there's a lot to look at here. I'm just going to start with the stagger value. So here we've got motion stagger as 3. For the translucent overlay, which is the background when it's expanded, the image border, the profile image, and the profile initial text are all 3. And then the name is 2 and the description is 1. So what we should expect from that is that all of the avatar circle animation will happen first, and then the name will happen second, and the description will happen third. And if we take a look, looking at it slowly, that is exactly what happens. We have the circle animation, we have the name, and we have the description all animating one after another, which is really nice to not have to, I don't know how many people are familiar with doing like a on animation end, start this animation, and then on animation end for that one, start this animation. It's very annoying to have to do all of that. So it's really nice that Android or that MotionLayout gives you the opportunity. One other really cool thing that I'd like to note about this particular constraint set is that this is the translucent overlay. It's the partially opaque, partially transparent pink background that we see here. And as you can see, it starts as constrained behind the image border. So when we are in our collapsed state, it's just hiding behind there, and actually it's alpha 0, so it's double hiding. And also we'll have this custom attribute called round%, which when round% is 1, it's a perfect circle, and when round% is 0, it's a perfect like rectangle. It has hard, sharp corners. I don't know how many people have ever tried to animate between a square and a circle in Android, but it's really hard. And this is a much easier way to do it. I was really excited when I found this. And one thing that's really funny about it too is that the translucent overlay end state, if we can find it, has a round% end of 0.0001, which is a little bit interesting. Why 0.0001, Kaitlyn? And the answer is when you turn it to 0, which we can look at, they, I think Google released MotionLayout with a divide by 0 bug, which I reported, and I think they're working on, but haven't released yet. You'll notice that it transitions really nicely from circle to square this direction, and then stays as a complete square all the way out on this way. So I got around that with a lot of zeros before my one. That was a fun discovery. What else do we have? Oh, so this is the image border crossfade that I was talking about. We've got the dark pink background with transitioning into the light blue background. And all you have to do with that is this little bit here with the crossfade 0 and 1 in the end state. The profile image, nothing interesting there. Initial text. Here we see the initial text goes to alpha 0. So it starts, it stays constrained to its area. So it still moves with it as it's disappearing, but it goes to the KA disappears as we go and brings in the text and brings down the name. I think that might be all that's interesting in here, although feel free to ask questions if you see something that you're curious about. One other thing that I would love to show is that you can actually add additional views. So here I'm going to do some live coding, see how that works out. You know how that always goes, but we're going to place a view in the scene that has constraints and isn't designated in the motion layout, and you'll see that you can just add views to the scene. If you don't want it to animate, it will just stay in place. And we'll constrain that to the bottom of the parent, the start, and the end. Let's set its text size to be sort of large, and we will set its text color to be, because I think that's the white. So what I'm expecting here, oh, and we'll put a little margin at the bottom. What I'm expecting here is to have a text view at the bottom of the screen that stays there no matter what state it's in, and just can kind of live there without motion. Oh, primary text color. Let's make it white so it's a little bit easier to see. Yeah, so here's this text. It says at the bottom of the waterfall, this text stays here. And then as we do our animation, that text doesn't move. It is at the very bottom of the file, so it's over top of the translucent overlay. But it's a really nice way to sort of use the motion layout in two ways at once. So you can have stationary views and moving views at the same time. Just to sort of prove that I wasn't kidding, there is a fair bit of code in the main activity just to get my avatar image into that view, but the actual animation code is in the motion scene. There's no animation code living in the main activity, which is super cool. And one other cool thing to know is that you can do all kinds of things with that motion layout in programmatic code as well. So this one is called motion container. You could do check the progress. You could transition to a state. You could check the state that it's currently in. So there's a lot of possibility to react in code to scenarios that are happening, which is great because we all know that if something's locked in XML, it's going to be really hard to update programmatically. So it's nice that they give both options. Very briefly, with the last couple of minutes, I'm going to show the design view, what that looks like. So here, oh, wow, that's very large. I guess I zoomed it in. Here we can see what the motion editor looks like in Android Studio. So you can look at the start and end states for the constraints. You can even update them in here. And then one really cool thing is that you can tap on the transition here and sort of just watch it do its thing. You can change how fast it does its thing. So if you really wanted to dig in and see each piece individually, or if you wanted to like have a party, you could go really fast. But that's kind of a cool way to take a look at what your animation is going to look like before you put it on screen. I mentioned earlier that there was a somewhat easy but not super easy way to see the different custom attributes, and it's right here. So I'll show that again. You tap into one of the items when you're in one of the start and end states, and then you can go into custom attributes here. And if, for example, you know it's going to be a float, you can sort of start. You're like, I want something to do with text. These are the options for text. Or you're like, I think I want to do something with alpha. It's not a super easy way to get the entire list of what's available, but there is sort of like a couple of different things you can do there. If we're like, oh, I think I want to do an integer value, there's a couple of different things that we can do there. And that sort of gives you an idea of what's available as far as custom attributes go. I think I'm coming up on my time before questions, which is great because I am out of material, unless anybody wanted me to show anything else in the interim. But do I have, there's Sierra.
I'm back.
Hello.
So you got a lot of positive feedback throughout that presentation, but I don't think I saw any specific questions. If anyone wants to post their questions in the chat for Kaitlyn, we can get started with some Q&A for the next 10 minutes. Or anything specific you want her to live code and really catch her off guard.
Yeah, put me on the spot. I'm ready.
Challenge round.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk a little bit about constraint layout too. There's just a lot that it's a very powerful tool, constraint layout. There's a lot that you can do with it. No questions? Come on, y'all.
You made it look too easy. We're
too
left
easy.
with no questions. Yeah.
That's all right. I'm not mad at it. Live code animating the text. Animating the text. Let's animate some text. Let's, just to make it even harder, let's try and do it in the motion editor tool where I don't do things normally. So where do we want the text to go? Maybe we'll put it in, it'll start here and maybe in the end state, it'll go to the top, or Let's get rid of that one. Put it, transition it all the way to the top, put a margin on it. And I guess the name of it is a little bit misleading now because it is not this text stays here anymore. Of course, I have no idea how to do that in the motion editor, so we're going to do it in here. And we probably don't need these constraints anymore because we're now animating it in the motion scene. So let's see, did that, oh, okay, it doesn't, let's see, put that down there and here and here. And we'll do a margin of 16. That's the start state, and then the end state is up there. Let's see if it does it. Ooh. We can't even run it in here and see if that works. Because sometimes the motion editor says that it will and it won't. Oh yeah, so there's our text. And when we start the transition, oh yeah, it heads to the top. It's got an ease in out, and it does not have a stagger value. So it just runs at the time of the animation. Yeah. I wonder what else we could do.
Kaitlyn, do you have any good resources for folks to get started? Because watching people do it, someone else do it is fine.
Right. No,
but sitting down and doing it yourself is a different story.
I learned almost everything I know from this guy's posts. Nicholas Roard has some really good motion layout stuff in his Medium. I can maybe, let's see, can I post this in the chat?
Yeah.
This is a really awesome tool that I used. There's also a lot of really great YouTube videos out there. There's just so many different things that you can do with it. It's kind of remarkable. And for example, I didn't put this in my example here, but one of the things that I've done for the motion layout work that I've done at my current job is I've created 4 constraint sets, not just a start and end, but a constraint expanded like this, a constraint collapsed portrait, a constraint collapsed landscape, and landscape the other way. And then I programmatically transition between those depending on what the orientation values coming back from the sensors are. And that way, sort of faking an app that changes orientation, even though it's locked portrait. So that's kind of a fun, like, weird thing to do with it. You can set as many constraint sets as you want. You unfortunately have to define an initial transition, but then those can be updated at any time in the activity class or the fragment or whatever class is using that layout. So there's a lot of different things you can do with it in that respect. And there's a lot of funny little bugs too. One of the things that maybe I would mention is if, for example, I wanted to at some point update the profile image visibility in the activity class, it won't respect that at all unless I do this. Visibility mode ignore, because there's 2 different things talking to the view at once. And one of them is the motion layout saying, I want you to be alpha 0 visible. And the other one is your activity class saying, no, I need this gone. And if you don't put this in there, then confusingly, it will not actually set itself to gone. So that was a fun lesson that I've learned in a lot of my work for motion layout. Yes, motion layout is stable. It has been out for a fair while, but I think they recently released a newer version of it. And the new version of Android Studio has the motion design tool. I'm not sure. I recently updated and got this option. So if you're not up to date on your Android Studio, you probably won't see this. But important to note that it is visible from the actual layout file, not the motion scene. There's no design tool for the motion scene itself.
At the beginning, you mentioned that you wanted you would want to talk a little bit about Stream. Do you want to share anything about that in these last couple of minutes?
Oh, sure. Stream is a super cool company based out of Portland, but we are now, we hire fully remote people as well now that we're all kind of working remotely. Stream is an AR company. So the scenario that we're solving for, I'm going to stop my share here so that you can see. The scenario that we're solving for here is like, imagine if your refrigerator broke down or stopped making ice or something like that. You could, rather than calling up customer service and scheduling someone to come out and having to be there for an 8-hour window, you could instead, if they have Stream as a service for their company, you could just hop on a video call with them. And with the Stream, if you're using a device that's AR capable, they can place 3D arrows in the scene. They can make live measurements. They can capture what we call a stream shot, which has 3D image data and uses object recognition. So if you took a picture, for example, of the serial number, they would be able to extract that information. And if they aren't able to help you fix it on the spot, they can at least know that they're bringing the right parts the first time so that they don't have to come out multiple times, which is super cool. There's a lot of use cases besides that for it, but that's like my classic elevator pitch version. Yeah. Really
cool, yeah.
It's also really helpful, like if you wanted to paint your room and you're like, I don't really know how much paint I need, you could work with someone who worked at a paint company and scan your room, and they'd be able to get the measurements from that to sort of tell you, oh, you need this many gallons of paint, or etc. It's yeah, and as Cami said, Stream is super good people too. Cami works with me at Stream, and it's just a really wonderful place to work. So that's Stream.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I have to hop off and moderate my next session, but everyone's free to stick around for a couple of minutes if you have any final questions to ask Kaitlyn before she hops off.
Sure, yeah, I'll be here for, is it 2 more minutes? Is that how long this is for, or is it?
You can stick around for a couple more minutes,
okay.
So it won't shut down immediately.
Sweet. All right.
So feel free to ask your most